For as long as humans have existed, we've looked up at the night sky in wonder. Those countless points of light scattered across the darkness have always pulled at us, whispering questions we can't fully answer. But what if the ancients, those who lived thousands of years before telescopes or satellites, knew something about the stars that we don't? Think about it. Long before our modern sciences, ancient cultures tracked the heavens with a precision that still leaves experts stunned. They built monuments aligned perfectly with constellations, carved stories of cosmic events into stone, and wove myths of starborn beings who shaped human destiny. Were they simply dreamers, or were they recording knowledge far deeper? Knowledge we've lost, ignored, or perhaps never even understood. Tonight, we're going to wander through that mystery. We'll explore alignments, myths, lost maps of the skies, and strange hints that suggest the ancients weren't just gazing at the stars for beauty. They may have been warning us. They may have been telling us who we are. Or maybe, just maybe, they were leaving behind the single greatest secret of all, that we are not alone. From the moment humans first gathered around fires, the night sky was their canvas. Imagine a world with no neon lights, no city glare, no satellites streaking across the horizon, just darkness, and above it, a vast dome alive with stars. Every night, without fail, the heavens would unfold like a cosmic theater. For ancient people, this wasn't background noise. It was the most reliable, most mysterious show in existence. And they weren't just passive spectators. They noticed patterns. They saw the stars rise and fall with the seasons. They watched the moon swell and vanish, only to be reborn. They tracked the planets wandering along their strange, shifting paths. What they discovered was rhythm, order, a sense that the sky was more than random glitter. It was a clock, a calendar, and perhaps even a message. Take the Sumerians, for instance. Living in Mesopotamia, over 5,000 years ago, they built one of humanity's first great civilizations. But alongside their temples and cities, they built something else, an entire system of watching the stars. They didn't just see points of light. They gave them names. They tracked their movements. They wrote them down on clay tablets, some of which still survive today. And in those tablets we find records of eclipses, conjunctions, even predictions of future events, all without telescopes, satellites, or modern math. Why? Why did they care so much? To the Sumerians, the stars weren't distant suns, they were God. Each light represented a divine power, a being shaping human fate. Watching the stars wasn't just science, it was survival. To ignore the sky was to ignore the will of the god. And they weren't alone in this belief. Across the world, cultures that had no contact with each other all seemed to arrive at the same conclusion. The heavens mattered. In ancient China, the emperor himself was thought to be responsible for keeping harmony between heaven and earth. If the stars shifted in strange ways, it meant the balance was broken, and often dynasties fell shortly after. Court astronomers weren't just scientists. They were guardians of the realm. A missed eclipse could mean the emperor's downfall. Travel west, and the same theme emerges. The Mayans of Central America built their entire calendar system, one so accurate it rivals modern calculations, based on celestial cycles. They tracked Venus with obsessive precision, recording every rising and setting of the planet. To them, Venus wasn't just a bright star, it was a harbinger of war, a divine sign that guided kings and armies. Their monuments, carved deep in the jungle, show that they aligned temples and pyramids with the heavens just as carefully as the Egyptians aligned theirs with Orion. Even hunter-gatherers without cities or empires turned their gaze upward. Aboriginal Australians, for example, encoded star knowledge into songlines, oral maps of the land and sky. These weren't just stories, they were tools for navigation, teaching, and survival. To forget them was to risk losing your way in both land and life. The universality of it is striking. Separate continents, separate languages, yet all saw the sky not as decoration, but as instruction. Why such obsession? Modern scholars often say it was practical. The stars guided crops, seasons, and migrations. But that explanation only goes so far. Practicality doesn't explain the sheer devotion, the monumental architecture, the myths of gods descending from Orion, the stories of starborn teaching. It doesn't explain why ancient people spent centuries carving entire mountains into observatories, or why they risked lives dragging stones across miles just to match the rising of the sun on a single day of the year, unless, of course, they believed the sky held secrets vital enough to shape their existence. Consider this. Today, we know Earth spins, tilts, and circles the sun, but without telescopes, without satellites, how could the ancients know the length of a year so precisely? How could they predict eclipses centuries in advance? Some argue it was genius observation, pure and simple. Others whisper of something more, lost knowledge, passed down from an earlier forgotten age. Maybe survivors of a great cataclysm, maybe beings from beyond. Whatever the case, the fact remains, they watched the heavens with an intensity we can barely imagine. The obsession went deeper than science. For many, the sky was destiny. Take astrology, born in Babylon thousands of years ago. To the Babylonians, the positions of planets weren't coincidences. They were signs, cosmic fingerprints, left on the moment of your birth. The stars shaped kings, empires, even the outcome of battles. And while modern science dismisses astrology as superstition, it's worth remembering that astronomy and astrology were once the same discipline. They split only recently in human history. In the ancient mind, there was no difference. To watch the stars was to watch fate unfold. Think of the emotional weight. Night after night, generation after generation, people stared upward, telling stories about Orion the Hunter, the Pleiades sisters, Sirius the Dog Star. Those stories weren't idle entertainment. They carried warnings, wisdom, and maybe even encoded memories of real events. When cultures half a world apart describe gods from the stars teaching them agriculture, or great floods tied to heavenly alignments, it raises a question: were they all imagining the same thing? Or were they recording a shared experience too strange to explain any other way? Modern people look at the stars and see mystery. The ancients looked and saw meaning. They saw teachers. They saw gods. They saw danger. And the deeper we look into their myths and monuments, the more it feels like they were desperate to pass something down, something about the sky that mattered so much it was worth carving into stone, aligning with mountains, encoding into entire cities. And here's the strangest part. In many ways, they knew things we rediscovered only thousands of years later. The Babylonians charted the 18-year cycle of eclipses, called the Saros cycle, long before modern astronomy confirmed it. The Egyptians knew of the 26,000-year wobble of Earth's axis, the precession of the equinoxes, something we typically credit to the Greek astronomer Hipparchus, around 50 BC. Yet hints of that knowledge appear in monuments far older. How? Where did they learn it? This obsession wasn't casual. It wasn't coincidence. It was global, relentless, and enduring. Which leaves us with a haunting question. Were the ancients just exceptionally good observers, or did they know something about the stars and our place beneath them that we've since forgotten? Because if they did, then the monuments they left behind aren't just ruins. They're messages. Star maps in stone, whispering across millennia, daring us to look up and remember. And that's where the real mystery begins. Because once you realize how obsessed the ancients were with the heavens, the next question becomes unavoidable. Why did they go to such lengths to build monuments that align with the stars? Imagine a world without electricity. No city lights, no airplanes crossing the horizon, no glowing phones or neon signs, just you, your community, and above you a vast dome of stars, billions of points of light scattered across the night, the Milky Way arching overhead like a river of silver dust, the moon waxing and waning with a rhythm so steady it feels alive. That sky wasn't a background detail to the ancients. It was their television, their compass, their clock, their calendar, their myth, and maybe even their warning system. For thousands of years, the night sky was the most reliable thing humanity had. The stars returned in patterns, the moon in cycles, the sun in seasons. from hunter-gatherers to early empires. This cosmic order was irresistible, and so they watched, they recorded, they aligned, and in time, they began to treat the sky not as decoration, but as a blueprint of existence itself. The first sky watchers, Mesopotamia. In Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, the Sumerians became some of the first true sky watchers. 5,000 years ago, they etched clay tablets with star charts. They named constellations, tracked eclipses, and created lists of planetary movements. To them, the stars weren't just dots of light. They were gods. Venus was Inanna, the goddess of love and war. Jupiter was Marduk, the chief deity of Babylon. To understand the sky was to understand divine will, and they weren't casual about it. The Babylonians, inheriting this obsession, built one of the first real scientific systems of astronomy. They tracked the Saros cycle, an 18-year rhythm of eclipses, and used it to predict future ones. Modern science would not confirm this cycle until thousands of years later, yet there it is, written in cuneiform. Some tablets even describe stars that are invisible to the naked eye, raising the question, were these simple records of careful observation or echoes of knowledge passed down from before recorded history? Egypt, the stars as immortality. Meanwhile, along the Nile, the Egyptians looked to the heavens not just for guidance, but for eternity. Their greatest monuments, the pyramids of Giza, were aligned with uncanny precision to the star. The shafts of the Great Pyramid point directly toward Orion's belt and Sirius. To the Egyptians, Orion was Osiris, god of the afterlife, and Sirius was Isis, goddess of rebirth. Death itself was mapped onto the star. Each year when Sirius rose in the pre-dawn sky, it heralded the flooding of the Nile, the lifeblood of Egypt. Was this simple observation, or was it something deeper, a cosmic ritual tying human life to celestial cycles? Pharaohs believed they became stars upon death, joining Osiris in Orion. Inscriptions on tombs tell us plainly, the journey of the soul was a journey through the heavens. And then comes the mystery. The Egyptians seem to know about the slow wobble of Earth's axis, the precession of the equinoxes, a cycle that takes nearly 20. How could a civilization over 4,000 years ago have understood such a vast measure of time? Some Egyptologists argue coincidence. Others whisper that this was inherited knowledge, the last traces of a forgotten science from an even older culture. China, the mandate of heaven written in the stars. Across the world in ancient China, the sky wasn't just sacred, it was political. Court astronomers held some of the highest positions in the empire. Their job was simple but dangerous. Read the stars and advise the emperor. If they failed to predict an eclipse, it could mean disgrace, punishment, even execution. Why such high stakes? Because the Chinese believed the heavens were directly tied to earthly rule. If the stars behaved strangely, it meant the emperor lost the mandate of heaven. Dynasties rose and fell with celestial omens. Chinese records are some of the longest running in history. They describe comets, supernovae, eclipses, and meteor showers. In fact, a Chinese text from 1054 AD describes a guest star so bright it could be seen in daylight for weeks. Modern astronomers now know this was a supernova, the explosion that created the Crab Nebula. But to the ancients, it was an omen, a cosmic event woven into the destiny of kings. The Mayans, Venus and the calendar of time. If the Babylonians gave us cycles and the Egyptians gave us monuments, the Mayans gave us time itself. Hidden in the jungles of Central America, they built an entire civilization around their astronomical calendar. And at the heart of it all was Venus. To the Mayans, Venus wasn't just a planet. It was a cosmic clock that dictated war, agriculture, and religion. They tracked its movements with such precision that their calculations of Venus's cycle are accurate to within a fraction of a day. Even modern astronomers are stunned by their records. Why Venus? In their mythology, Venus was tied to the feathered serpent god Kukulkan, a bringer of both wisdom and destruction. When Venus rose in the morning sky, it was often interpreted as a sign of war. Kings timed battles to align with its cycle. Their monuments, from Chichen Itza to Uxmal, were carefully aligned to the rising and setting of Venus at key times of year. Their obsession with cycles extended beyond Venus. The Mayan long count calendar spanned thousands of years, predicting ages of creation and destruction. Many misinterpreted it as predicting the end of the world in 20. But for the Mayans, it wasn't an end, it was a reset. Time itself moved in cosmic cycles, endless and eternal, dictated by the heavens. Polynesians and Aboriginal Australians, navigators of the sky. Not all sky watching was monumental. For the Polynesians who sailed the Pacific, the stars were life and death. They used constellations as maps, memorizing star lines that guided them across thousands of miles of open ocean. Without compasses or sextants, they navigated using nothing but the heavens, reading subtle changes in the stars' positions as they rose and set. Similarly, Aboriginal Australians wove star knowledge into song lines, oral maps that linked landmarks on Earth with patterns in the sky. These stories carried immense practical knowledge: when to hunt, where to travel, how to find water. One of their constellations, the Emu in the sky, is not made of stars at all, but of the dark dust lanes of the Milky Way. Thousands of years before modern astronomy photographed nebula, Aboriginal peoples already recognized the shapes hidden in the cosmic dark. The same stars, the same myth. What's perhaps most striking is that cultures across the globe with no contact, no shared language, often fixated on the same stars. Orion appears in myths from Egypt to Greece, to the Americas. The Pleiades cluster, those 7 faint stars, are mentioned by name in Sumerian, Greek, Native American and Japanese traditions. How is it that people separated by oceans told nearly identical stories about the same patch of sky? Coincidence, or a shared memory, encoded and passed through myth? Some suggest these parallels point to an ancient, global culture that spread star knowledge across the world. Others whisper of something stranger, that visitors from the stars themselves seeded this knowledge, ensuring that humans everywhere remembered their presence. Science or inheritance. Skeptics argue the ancients simply paid closer attention than we do today. With no Netflix or streetlights, of course they noticed Venus's rise or Orion's belt, but this explanation feels incomplete. Observation doesn't explain the sheer scale of effort. Why drag stones across miles of desert to align with solstices? Why build entire cities to mirror constellations? Why devote lifetimes to carving myths into stone, all tied to the stars, unless they believed the sky carried truths vital to survival? Perhaps they weren't just marking seasons. Perhaps they were recording warnings, signs of past cataclysms, like comets and floods, encoded in myth to ensure future generations remembered. Or perhaps they inherited knowledge from an earlier age, survivors of a lost civilization, passing down fragments of a science we no longer understand. In Babylon, priests read the stars to guide kings. In China, dynasties rose and fell with eclipses. In Egypt, immortality itself was written in Orion. In the Americas, Venus decided the fates of armies. Across the Pacific, star maps carried sailors to new lands. Everywhere, the heavens dictated human destiny. And while we look back with modern skepticism, dismissing much of this as myth or superstition, it's worth asking, did the ancients truly misunderstand the stars? Or did they see something we've forgotten? Patterns, dangers, or even visitors hidden in the night sky? Because if they did, then the monuments, myths, and calendars they left behind aren't just relics. They're messages. Messages pointing us upward, daring us to look again. If the ancients were obsessed with the sky, then their greatest works, their monuments, temples, and cities, were their way of locking that obsession into stone. Again and again, across continents and millennia, we see the same strange pattern, structures that line up with stars, solstices, and celestial cycles. Coincidence? Or were these alignments intentional, purposeful, even desperate attempts to preserve knowledge across time? Let's take a journey through some of the most mysterious sites on Earth and see how humanity's monuments might be less about worshipping gods and more about communicating with the heavens The pyramids of Giza, Orion's belt on Earth. Standing tall for the pyramids of Giza have fascinated and baffled generations. Scholars still argue about how they were built, but there's another question that often gets overlooked. Why were they built this way? The three main pyramids, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, are not laid out in a straight line. Instead, their positions mimic the three stars of Orion's belt. When viewed from above, the similarity is uncanny. The ancient Egyptians weren't shy about this symbolism either. In their mythology, Orion represented Osiris, the god of death and resurrection. The pharaohs believed that upon dying, they would ascend to Orion to join Osiris among the stars. Even the shafts within the Great Pyramid are aligned with specific stars. One points to Orion's belt, another points to Sirius, the brightest star in the sky, and symbol of Isis, the goddess of rebirth. To some, this isn't coincidence. It's a deliberate design, a resurrection machine built to guide the pharaoh's soul to the stars. But why go to such lengths? Why shape millions of tons of stone to mirror Orion? Was it purely religious devotion, or were the Egyptians encoding something greater? Some alternative researchers suggest the pyramids weren't tombs at all, but repositories of star knowledge, a cosmic library in stone, telling future generations, this is where we came from, this is where we go when we die. Stonehenge, the solar temple of Britain, thousands of miles away on the windswept plains of England, stands Stonehenge, a ring of massive stones, each weighing up to 25 tons, dragged across miles of land. Why? Archaeologists agree that Stonehenge was more than just a monument. It was an observed on the summer solstice, the longest day of the year. The sun rises in perfect alignment with the heel stone, casting its light straight into the center of the monument. Thousands still gather every June to watch this ancient spectacle, just as people did. But Stonehenge isn't just about the sun. Some researchers believe it also tracked the moon's 18.6-year cycle, the same Saros cycle known to the Babylonians. Others argue it aligns with certain stars, making it a calendar written in stone. The big question was this about farming seasons, or something deeper? Some suggest Stonehenge was a temple that encoded knowledge of cosmic cycles far beyond simple agriculture. Others whisper it was built to honor visitors from the skies, a landing marker for gods, perhaps, or even a beacon pointing upward. Teotihuacan, the city of the gods. In Mexico lies Teotihuacan, the so-called city of the gods. At its heart are the massive Pyramid of the Sun and Pyramid of the Moon, connected by the Avenue of the Dead. And once again, alignment plays a central role. The entire city is laid out on a grid tilted about 15 degrees from true north. Why? Because this orientation aligns with the setting of the Pleiades star cluster. The Pleiades were central in Mesoamerican mythology, often associated with creation and destruction cycle. The pyramids themselves also line up with celestial events. From certain vantage points, the sun sets directly over the Pyramid of the Sun on specific dates, signaling the start of agricultural cycles. But many researchers argue the precision is too great to be mere farming convenience. Instead, they believe Teotihuacan was designed as a cosmic map, a miniature version of the heavens built on Earth. And here's where it gets stranger. Underground tunnels beneath the pyramids contain traces of mercury, a rare and toxic element. Why mercury? Some speculate it symbolized rivers of the underworld, or even reflected the heavens. Others believe it may have been used in rituals tied to the stars. Teotihuacan's true purpose is still a mystery. Its builders left no written record, but what they left in stone screams of a civilization desperate to connect Earth with the heavens. Machu Picchu, the celestial citadel. High in the Andes, Machu Picchu sits perched like an eagle's nest above the clouds. Built by the Inca in the 15th century, it wasn't just a city, it was a sky temple. At the heart of Machu Picchu lies the Intihuatana stone, often called the hitching post of the sun. This carved granite stone aligns perfectly with the solstices. On the winter solstice, the stone casts no shadow at all, as if the sun itself were tethered to it. The Inca worshipped Inti, the sun god, as the source of all life, but their temples also aligned with other celestial bodies, including the Pleiades. Just like in Mesoamerica, the Pleiades played a crucial role in Incan agriculture. And why did cultures separated by thousands of miles fixate on the same stars? To some, this points to shared human observation. To others, it hints at something more, a global system of sky knowledge passed down from an earlier civilization. Chaco Canyon, the Sun Dagger. In the deserts of New Mexico lies Chaco Canyon, home to the ancestral Puebloans. Here, carved into fachada beauty, lies the famous Sun Dagger. On the summer solstice, a beam of sunlight passes through stone slabs and lands directly on a spiral petroglyph carved into the rock. On the winter solstice, two beams bracket the spiral. This isn't coincidence, it's precision. A solar calendar built into stone, hidden in a desert canyon, but the spiral symbol itself is fascinating. Spirals are found in ancient rock art across the world, often linked to the sun, time, or even the cosmos itself. Were these just simple artistic symbols, or a universal code about cycles of time and cosmic order? Global patterns, coincidence or connection? What unites all these sites is precision. The pyramids, Stonehenge, Teotihuacan, Machu Picchu, Chaco Canyon, all built by different cultures in different times, with no contact, yet all obsessed with aligning monuments to the heavens. Skeptics argue it was practical. Tracking solstices helped with farming. Alignments with stars made navigation easier, but this explanation misses the scale. Why invest centuries of labor, move mountains of stone, and risk lives for simple farming calendar? Why encode this knowledge in massive monuments designed to last thousands of years? It feels like something more, as if these sites were built to preserve cosmic knowledge, to pass messages forward through time. Maybe they were warnings about cycles of destruction, encoded so future generations would remember. Maybe they were attempts to connect with gods, or with beings who came from the stars themselves. And here's a chilling thought. If a civilization wanted to leave behind a message for the distant future, they wouldn't write it on paper. They wouldn't store it on fragile technology. They'd carve it into stone, aligning it with the eternal star. That way, even after millennia, even after floods and wars, the message would still be there, waiting to be uncovered. The controversy: mainstream archaeology insists these alignments were symbolic or practical, but alternative researchers see a pattern that goes deep. They argue the monuments are too widespread, too consistent, to be coincidence. They whisper of a forgotten global civilization, one that understood the sky and left behind monuments to prove it. Others go further, suggesting the builders were guided by visitors from beyond, beings who taught humanity to look upward and remember their home among the stars. Whether you believe the mainstream or the fringe, the fact remains. Again and again, humanity shaped stone into mirrors of the sky, and they did it with a precision that still awes modern engineers. So the question becomes why? Why build monuments aligned so perfectly with the stars? Were they tools, temples, or time capsules? Were they warning, or were they simply echoes of a greater truth, that our destiny is written in the heavens? To answer that, we have to look at the next piece of the puzzle: the artifacts and relics that don't seem to fit our timeline, the so-called out-of-place objects that hint at knowledge far ahead of its time. If monuments aligned with the stars are the architecture of ancient sky obsession, then strange artifacts are the breadcrumbs, scattered pieces of evidence that don't quite fit our neat version of history. Archaeologists call them anomalies. Researchers on the fringe call them out-of-place artifacts, or oparts. Each one sparks the same unsettling question: did the ancients know more about the cosmos and about our world than we give them credit for? The Antikythera mechanism, a computer from the deep. In 1901, divers exploring a Roman-era shipwreck near the Greek island of Antikythera pulled up a corroded hunk of bronze. At first glance, it looked like a lump of junk, but when cleaned, gears and intricate cogs appeared. Scholars were stunned. This wasn't a statue or a weapon, it was a machine. Now known as the Antikythera mechanism, it has been called the world's first computer. Built over 2,000 years ago, it could predict eclipses, track planetary movements, and even forecast Olympic dates. Its complexity rivals that of 18th century clockwork. But here's the mystery. How did the Greeks or anyone in that era develop such advanced engineering, only for it to vanish from history for over 1,000 years? Mainstream historians argue it was an isolated genius invention, but others wonder, was the Antikythera mechanism the survivor of a far older tradition, a relic of knowledge passed down from a forgotten age? And if this single device survived, how many others, perhaps more advanced, were lost forever? The Piri Reis map, Antarctica without ice. In 1929, a map was discovered in Istanbul's Topkapi Palace, drawn by Ottoman Admiral Piri Reis in 1513. At first, nothing unusual, just another world map. But then scholars noticed something strange. The southern edge of the map seemed to depict Antarctica. Not only that, it showed the continent without its ice cap. Modern science didn't confirm the full coastline of Antarctica until the 20th century, using sonar and satellite imaging. How could a 16th century mapmaker have drawn it? Skeptics say it's coincidence, or perhaps the mapmaker copied older charts that simply misrepresented South America. But others believe the Piri Reis map was based on ancient source maps, copies of copies stretching back to an advanced civilization that charted the globe long before ours. Some even suggest that only an aerial perspective could account for the accuracy. But who could have mapped the world from the sky in antiquity? Göbekli Tepe, the world's first observatory. In southeastern Turkey lies Göbekli Tepe, a site that rewrote human history. Built around 11,000 years ago, thousands of years before Stonehenge, thousands before the pyramids. It consists of massive carved stone pillars, arranged in circles. Each pillar is decorated with animals and symbols. Archaeologists believe it was a ritual site, but some researchers argue Göbekli Tepe was more than that. It was an observatory. The carvings on its pillars may depict constellations recording events in the sky. Some scholars have even linked the artwork to a comet impact around 10,900 BC, thought to have triggered the Younger Dryas climate event. If true, then Göbekli Tepe isn't just the oldest temple in the world. It's the oldest observatory, a warning in stone about destruction from the heaven. And here's the twist. After centuries of use, the site was deliberately buried around 8,000 BC. Who buries a temple of that size on purpose? Was it an act of reverence, or a desperate attempt to preserve it for the future? Pumapunku, precision in the Andes. High in Bolivia, near the better-known Tiwanaku site, lies Pumapunku. Here scattered stone blocks lie broken and toppled, but their craftsmanship is unlike anything else from the ancient world. Gigantic stones, some weighing over 100 tons, cut with precision so sharp that razor blades could fit between the joints. Many blocks are shaped into intricate interlocking H shapes, as though designed for massive stone Lego. The problem: Pumapunku is over 1,500 years old, built long before the Inca, by people with no known system of writing, wheels or advanced tools. How did they cut and move such massive stones with such precision? Mainstream archaeologists credit human ingenuity, ropes and stone tools, but others argue the precision suggests lost technology, advanced tools or methods passed down from a forgotten civilization. Some even go further, claiming Pumapunku could be the remnants of star temples, aligned to constellations that mattered to its builder. The Baghdad Battery and ancient technology. In the 1930s, workers near Baghdad unearthed small clay jars containing copper cylinders and iron rods. When tested, these Baghdad batteries could produce a weak electric current when filled with vinegar or wine. Were they simple storage jars or primitive batteries? If they were, what were they powering? Some suggest they may have been used for electroplating metals, or in rituals that shocked initiates with divine power. Others argue they are proof of a lost science, electricity discovered, forgotten, and rediscovered millennia later. It raises a bigger question. How many other ancient technologies were lost to time? What if devices far more advanced once existed, but left behind only fragments too strange for us to recognize? The Dogon and Sirius B. Among the Dogon people of Mali, oral traditions speak of beings called the Nomo, who came from the star Sirius. But what's more shocking is that their myths describes Sirius not as a single star, as it appears to the naked eye, but as a binary system. Sirius A, the bright star we see, and Sirius B, a dense white dwarf invisible without modern telescope. The Dogon described the orbital period of Sirius B with uncanny accuracy. How could they have known? Skeptics claim their knowledge was contaminated by modern contact, but some anthropologists documented the stories before such contact was likely. If the Dogon truly knew about Sirius B thousands of years ago, then either they had access to knowledge far beyond their means, or their Nomo visitors really did come from the star. Other anomalies and out-of-place mysteries. The list of strange artifacts goes on. Ancient crystal lenses in Nimrod that suggest optical technology. Strange spheres found in South Africa with perfectly carved grooves, dated to billions of years old. Giant geoglyphs like the Nazca lines in Peru, only visible from the sky. Caves with star maps dating back over 15,000 years. Individually, each of these can be explained coincidence, misinterpretation, or natural formation, but collectively they build a picture that refuses to sit neatly inside our textbooks. They suggest that humanity's story may not be as linear or as isolated as we like to think. The message of the artifacts. So what do these anomalies tell us? One possibility is simple. The ancients were geniuses, careful observers who achieved incredible things with limited tools. Another possibility is more unsettling, that they inherited knowledge from a lost civilization, a society advanced enough to map the stars, build precision machines, and leave behind fragments for future generations. And then there's the wildest possibility of all, that humanity didn't achieve this knowledge alone, that teachers from the stars seeded it across cultures, leaving behind clues like the Dogon Sirius myths or the Piri race map. Whatever the truth, these artifacts challenge us. They force us to admit we don't know everything, that the story of human history might contain missing chapters, erased by time, flood, or fire. When we think of myths, we often imagine fantasy, gods hurling thunderbolts, serpents swallowing the sun, heroes chasing monsters across the heaven. But what if these weren't just stories? What if myths were the ancients' way of encoding astronomical knowledge, wrapping cosmic truths in the language of legend, so they could be remembered, retold, and passed down through generations? All around the world, myths are filled with the sky. Constellations become animals, gods, and epic tales. Floods, fires, and battles mirror real events in the heavens. To the ancients, storytelling wasn't just entertainment, it was survival. Myth was their library, their science textbook, their warning system. And the deeper we look, the more it seems that myths may hide memories of cosmic events that shook humanity to its core. Orion, the hunter in the sky. Few constellations are as universally recognized as Orion. The Egyptians saw him as Osiris, god of death and rebirth. The Greeks called him the Great Hunter. In South America, some tribes saw him not as a man but as a celestial jaguar. Across cultures, Orion looms large in the sky and in myth. But what if these stories were more than coincidence? Many researchers believe Orion wasn't just a hunter, he was a marker, a cosmic signpost pointing to something the ancients wanted us to remember. The Egyptians tied Orion to Osiris, the god who was killed, dismembered, and resurrected. His myth mirrors the cycle of Orion disappearing and reappearing in the night sky each year. In this way, the stars didn't just inspire a god, they explained death, resurrection, and the promise of rebirth. But perhaps they also hinted at something more, a cosmic cycle of destruction and renewal, echoed in human life and history. The Pleiades, the seven sisters who never leave us. Look up on a clear night, and you might see a tiny cluster of stars, delicate and faint, just above Orion's shoulder. The Pleiades. To the Greeks, they were the seven sisters, chased eternally by Orion. To the Japanese, they are Subaru, the gathering. To Native Americans, they were young women rescued from a bear by being lifted into the sky. To the Maori of New Zealand, they mark the new year. Why did cultures across the globe fixate on the same little cluster of stars? The Pleiades aren't the brightest, yet they're among the most mythologized. Some believe it's because they're heliacal rising, The moment they first appear in the dawn sky marked seasonal changes vital to agriculture. Others whisper of something stranger, that the Pleiades were remembered as the home of the gods, or even the birthplace of humanity. In fact, many myths speak of star-born teachers descending from the Pleiades. Could these be metaphors for migrations, or echoes of something even more otherworldly? And here's the eerie part. Across the globe, the stories always say the same thing. The Pleiades are tied to beginnings, creation, and the origins of life. The flood myths, cosmic catastrophes, remembered. Nearly every culture on Earth has a flood myth. The Bible speaks of Noah. The Sumerians told of Utnapishtim. The Greeks spoke of Deucalion. In India, Manu was saved by a giant fish. Native American tribes tell of floods that reshaped the land. Mainstream scholars argue floods are a universal human experience. Rivers rise, rains come, and stories grow. But some researchers suggest these myths hide something more cosmic. What if the floods weren't just earthly disasters, but memories of impacts from the sky? Take the Younger Dryas event around. Evidence suggests a comet or fragments of one struck Earth, causing massive floods, fires, and a sudden return to Ice Age conditions. Could flood myths be the cultural memory of this event? If so, then the gods who sent floods from the sky weren't metaphor. They were attempts to describe real cosmic catastrophes in mythic terms. The stars may not have just inspired myths. They may have warned of cycles of destruction. Stories of gods punishing humanity with floods or fire could be memory encoded, a way of saying, watch the sky, because it will happen again. The cosmic serpents and dragons. Snakes, serpents and dragons slither through myths worldwide. But look closer, and many of them aren't just earthly reptiles. They're celestial. In Norse mythology, Jormungandr, the world serpent, coils around the earth, destined to rise during Ragnarok and swallow the sun. In Hindu myth, the serpent Rahu swallows the sun and moon, causing eclipses. In Chinese myth, dragons fly through the heavens, controlling rain and celestial order. What if these weren't random creatures, but coded descriptions of real astronomical events? A serpent devouring the sun sounds a lot like a solar eclipse. A dragon darkening the sky resembles a comet with a long, fiery tail. Ancient peoples, unable to describe these events scientifically, may have personified them as cosmic beasts, and in doing so, they ensured the knowledge survived. A child might forget an astronomical cycle, but a child would never forget the story of a dragon swallowing the sun. The hero's journey as a star map. Some myths may not just describe celestial events, but also encode entire journeys across the sky. Take the Greek hero Perseus. His adventures slaying Medusa, rescuing Andromeda, are written in the stars as constellations. This pattern repeats across cultures. Heroes chase monsters, rescue maidens, rise to the heavens, and in the sky, we see the constellations laid out in the same position. Myths weren't just entertainment. They were maps, teaching people how to navigate both land and time by following stories across the stars. The gods who came from the sky, and then there are the myths that are harder to explain away as astronomy. Stories of gods descending from the heavens, bringing knowledge, teaching humanity skills, then returning to the stars. The Sumerians wrote of the Anunnaki, sky gods who shaped humanity. The Dogon speak of the Nommo, star beings from Sirius. The Maya revered Kukulkan, the feathered serpent who came from the sky and promised to return. The Greeks told of Prometheus, who brought fire from the heavens to humanity. Were these simply metaphors for inspiration, migration, or leadership? Or were they memories of real encounters, beings mistaken for gods because they came from the stars, perhaps even with knowledge of them? Skeptics say these are just archetypes, but the similarity across continents is haunting. How did cultures with no contact all come up with stories of sky gods teaching them, unless they weren't imagining it? Encoded warnings in story form. When we strip away the surface of myth, a pattern emerges. The stars vanish, and the world floods. A serpent eats the sun, and the sky darkens. Gods descend, bringing knowledge or fire. These aren't random stories. They're warnings, memories, and teachings coded into tales. Imagine trying to pass knowledge across thousands of years, without writing, without machines. How would you do it? You'd tell stories. You'd wrap the lesson in a tale, dramatic enough to be remembered, simple enough to be retold, and universal enough to spread. Maybe the ancients weren't just entertaining themselves. Maybe they were encoding astronomy, cosmic cycles, and catastrophic warnings in myth. And maybe, just maybe, we're the ones who have forgotten how to read the code. The myths we don't understand even today. There are myths we can't fully explain. Why do so many cultures describe a first time, a golden age when gods walked the earth, only to vanish? Why do stories of floods, fire from the sky, and cosmic serpents appear everywhere? And why are the same stars, Orion, Sirius, the Pleiades, so central across the globe? Either humanity shares a strange universal imagination, or we share memories of real cosmic events, wrapped in the language of myth. So if myths were more than stories, if they were codes for cosmic events, warnings, and even memories of contact, then what does that say about humanity's place in the universe? To explore that, we need to look not just at stories, but at the catastrophes they may have been pointing to, the floods, the fires, the cosmic disasters that may have wiped civilizations off the map. If the ancients were obsessed with the sky, if their myths were more than stories, then one theme rises again and again: catastrophe. Nearly every culture speaks of floods, fires, or darkness descending from above. The heavens weren't just a place of gods and guidance, they were a source of danger. And over, humanity left behind warnings carved into myth, stone, and ritual. What if those warnings weren't just symbolic? What if the ancients experienced real cosmic disasters, and their obsession with the stars was a way of watching for the next one? The fragile Earth beneath the stars today, we think of Earth as solid, stable, reliable. But to the ancients, the world felt far more precarious. Crops could fail, rivers could flood, earthquakes, droughts, and storms could destroy entire communities. And above all loomed the sky, not serene, but unpredictable. Comets streaked across it, stars appeared and disappeared, the sun and moon darkened in eclipses. To people with no scientific explanation, these weren't random events, they were cosmic warnings. And perhaps in some cases they really were, because Earth's history is littered with cataclysms, moments when cosmic forces reshaped life in an instant. Asteroid strikes, volcanic eruptions, ice ages, solar flares. These are not just possibilities, they are inevitabilities, written into the very fabric of planetary history. The question is, did the ancients witness them firsthand? And if so, did they leave us myths and monuments as desperate warnings? The Younger Dryas, a forgotten apocalypse around 12,900 years ago. Something strange happened. The Earth, just beginning to warm after the last ice age, suddenly plunged back into near-glacial conditions. Temperatures dropped. Megafauna, mammoths, giant sloths, saber-toothed cats, vanished. Human populations shifted, and then, just as suddenly, the cold ended about 1,200 years later. This event is known as the Younger Dryas. For decades, scientists debated what caused it. Then, a radical theory emerged: a comet impact. Evidence suggests fragments of a massive comet struck Earth, triggering wildfires, releasing floods from melting ice, and plunging the planet into chaos. If this is true, it would have been one of the most traumatic events humanity ever faced. Imagine the sky raining fire, floods roaring across continents, animals dying, climates shifting overnight. How would survivors remember it? Probably not with scientific language. They'd tell stories, stories of gods angry with humanity, stories of floods sweeping away the world, stories of fire from the sky. Sound familiar? It matches myths from every corner of the globe. Could flood stories like Noah's Ark, Gilgamesh, or Manu's boat all be cultural memories of the Younger Dryas impact? And if so, then myths aren't fantasy. They're warnings encoded in story form. Comets, harbingers of doom for most of history. Comets were feared. To the ancients, they weren't pretty streaks of light. They were omens of disaster. Chinese astronomers recorded them meticulously, tying them to famines, wars, and the fall of dynasties. In Europe, comets were seen as heralds of plague or the death of kings. Why such dread? Perhaps it was superstition, but what if it was memory? If a comet did trigger the Younger Dryas, then ancient humans might have witnessed a firestorm from the sky. In that case, fearing comets wasn't irrational, it was survival instinct. Modern science confirms comets are dangerous. Some carry enough energy to destroy civilizations. Others break apart, scattering fragments that can rain down for centuries. The ancients may have known this in their own way, not through telescopes, but through trauma. Solar fury, the wrath of the sun. Not all cosmic disasters come from beyond. Some come from our own star. The sun, steady as it seems, is capable of violent outbursts. Solar flares and coronal mass ejections that can disrupt Earth's atmosphere and technology. Ancient cultures often spoke of the sun in fearful terms. In Egyptian myth, the Eye of Ra unleashed fiery destruction upon humanity. In Hindu texts, the god Surya blazed with destructive force. Even the Norse told of Ragnarok, when the sun would be devoured, plunging the world into chaos. Were these just symbolic, or memories of real solar events? Auroras, flares, or strange atmospheric phenomena that terrified ancient observers? Some scientists speculate that extreme solar storms may have occurred in prehistory, events powerful enough to scorch skies red and disrupt climate. If so, myths of fiery gods punishing the world may be echoes of real solar wrath. Volcanoes, earthquakes, and the sky connection. Some disasters weren't cosmic at all, but they looked like it. When Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD, it turned day to night and rained fire from the sky. To survivors, it must have felt like the heavens themselves had opened. Imagine ancient witnesses with no understanding of geology. Of course, they would see it as punishment from the gods above. The eruption of Thera, modern Santorini around 1600 BC, may have inspired the story of Atlantis, a thriving civilization swallowed by fire, flood, and sky-darkening ash. Earthquakes, too, were often linked to celestial anger. In Greek myth, Poseidon, god of the sea, also wielded earthquakes, linking water and destruction. To the ancients, the line between earth and sky wasn't clear. Disasters were always cosmic, always tied to the heavens, and perhaps, in a deeper sense, they were right, because cosmic cycles often trigger earthly chaos. Cycles of destruction. Did the ancients know? Here's where things get truly strange. Many myths don't just describe one catastrophe. They describe ages of the world, each ending in destruction, followed by rebirth. The Mayans spoke of previous worlds destroyed by flood and fire. Hindu cosmology describes endless cycles of creation and destruction, each lasting thousands of years. The Greeks told of a golden age, silver age, bronze age, each ended by disaster. Why such obsession with cycles? Some believe the ancients tracked long-term celestial movements, precession, comet returns, solar cycles, and saw patterns of catastrophe. Perhaps they recognized that Earth isn't stable, but caught in repeating rhythms of destruction, and so they encoded this knowledge in myth, not to explain the past, but to warn the future. Encoded warnings in monuments. If myths were warnings, monuments may have been too. The Great Pyramid, Stonehenge, Teotihuacan, all align with stars and cycles. Some researchers argue they weren't just ceremonial sites, but calendars designed to predict catastrophic alignments. For example, some claim the pyramids encode the precession cycle, a 26,000-year wobble that may align with cosmic events. Others see comet impact symbols at Göbekli Tepe, carved as warnings. The Nazca lines in Peru, giant geoglyphs only visible from the sky, may have been ritual pleas to gods to spare humanity from destruction. What if these weren't superstitions, but desperate survival strategies? Ways of saying, we lived through the fire once. Don't forget, it will come again. Are we ignoring their warnings? Today we think we're advanced. We have telescopes, satellites, space probes, but we also live in fragile systems. Technology that could collapse overnight in a solar storm, cities vulnerable to sea rise, global networks that depend on stability. If the ancients left warnings, are we listening, or are we repeating the same mistakes, ignoring cycles, forgetting the past, dismissing myths as fantasy until catastrophe comes again? The mystery of human memory. Maybe the greatest cosmic warning isn't written in stone or myth. Maybe it's in our very psychology. Humanity seems to suffer from amnesia. We forget disasters quickly. We rebuild in floodplains. We settle near volcanoes. We laugh at myths as fairy tales. But what if those myths are the only reason we survive this long? What if they are the echoes of survival manuals, passed across millennia, begging us to pay attention to the sky? If the ancients encoded cosmic catastrophes into myth and monument, it means they had an understanding of deep time cycles stretching thousands, even tens of thousands of years. How could they know this? To answer that, we need to look at something even stranger: the ancient knowledge of precession, equinoxes, and vast cosmic cycles. When we look at the night sky, it seems timeless. The stars rise, they set, they glitter in familiar constellations. To us, they feel eternal. But the ancients somehow knew otherwise. They understood that the heavens change, slowly, almost imperceptibly, across thousands of years. They knew of cosmic rhythms so vast that it takes generations to notice. And the strangest part, many cultures encoded this knowledge long before modern science confirmed it. This raises the unsettling question: how did they know? The precession of the equinoxes. One of the most mysterious pieces of ancient knowledge is something called the precession of the equinox. Today, we know the Earth wobbles like a spinning top, completing a slow cycle roughly every 26,000 years. This wobble causes the stars to shift position in the sky over millennia. The North Star we know today, Polaris, hasn't always been the North Star, and won't be forever. Greek astronomer Hipparchus is credited with discovering precession around 50 BC. But here's the catch. Evidence suggests many civilizations knew about it thousands of years earlier. In Egypt, temples are aligned to stars that no longer rise where they once did, suggesting the builders accounted for precession. At Angkor Wat in Cambodia, the temple layout seems to mirror constellations as they appeared not during its construction, but centuries earlier. And in India, Vedic texts speak of stellar alignments consistent with knowledge of precession, dating back at least 3,000 years. How could cultures track something that takes millennia to observe? No single human could live long enough to notice the change. Either they had astonishingly precise records passed down through generations, or they inherited the knowledge from somewhere else. The zodiac ages and ancient cycles precession also explains something else: the astrological age. Because of the wobble, the sun rises in different constellations on the spring equinox across thousands of years. Each period, about 2,100 years long, is called an age. The age of Taurus, the age of Aries, the age of Pisces, and so on. Astrology aside, ancient cultures seem to have been aware of these shifts. The bull cults of ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia flourished during the age of Taurus. Later, the ram became central in the age of Aries. Today, we're said to live in the age of Pisces, moving slowly into the age of Aquarius. Coincidence, or were ancient religions tied to cosmic ages, reflecting knowledge of precession long before it was officially discovered? Mayan long count and deep time in Mesoamerica. The Mayans tracked time in cycles of staggering length. Their long count calendar spans nearly 5,125 years, but it was part of even larger cycles, Bactunes, Catunes, and beyond, extending into tens of thousands of years. On December 24, 2012, their calendar famously ended, sparking modern doomsday predictions. But for the Maya, it wasn't the end of the world. It was the end of a cycle and the beginning of another. Their entire worldview was based on deep cosmic rhythms, with human history woven into the fabric of the stars. Where did this obsession come from? Some argue it's simply the product of long observation. Others believe it reflects inherited knowledge from an earlier lost civilization, one that tracked the stars across cycles too vast for any one culture to notice on its own. Ancient India and Yuga cycles. In Hindu cosmology, time is divided into yugas, immense cycles lasting tens of thousands of years. The four yugas, Satya, Treta, Dvapara, and Kali, represent a slow decline of humanity from a golden age into darkness, before rebirth and renewal. The full cycle, a Mahayuga, spans 4.32 million years. That's a scale so massive it boggles the modern mind. Were these just mythological numbers, or an attempt to grapple with cosmic cycles beyond human comprehension? What's intriguing is how the yugas echo other traditions: the Greeks' golden, silver, and bronze ages, the Mayans' cycles of worlds, even the Egyptian concept of Zep Tepi, the first time when gods walked the earth. Different cultures, same pattern, ages of humanity rising and falling with the rhythm of the heavens. Angkor Wat, a temple of the stars deep in the jungles of Cambodia. Angkor Wat stands as one of the largest religious monuments on Earth, but its beauty hides a mystery. Scholars have found that its layout mirrors the constellation Draco, as it appeared in 10,500 BC, thousands of years before the temple was built. Why would a 12th century temple reflect a sky pattern from prehistoric time? Some believe it's evidence of inherited star maps, preserved through oral tradition. Others think it's a deliberate attempt to anchor the temple to cosmic cycles, connecting the Khmer Empire to an eternal rhythm beyond human history. Either way, it suggests knowledge of deep time, of cycles spanning not centuries but millennia. The Egyptians and Zep Tepi. The Egyptians spoke of Zep Tepi, the first time, a golden age when gods ruled the earth. To many it was myth, but to some researchers, Zep Tepi may represent an ancient memory of a lost epoch, perhaps tied to precession. The alignment of the pyramids to Orion and Sirius is precise, but some argue it reflects the sky not as it appeared in 2500. If true, it suggests the builders were encoding knowledge of precession, and perhaps pointing back to a forgotten age. Why 10,500 BC? Coincidentally, that's around the time the last ice age ended, just after the Younger Dryas cataclysm. Was Zep Tepi a mythic way of remembering a time before the flood, when an earlier civilization thrived? Polaris wasn't always north today. Polaris sits almost perfectly at the north celestial pole, making it our North Star. But because of precession, it hasn't always been that way. Around 3000 BC, the star Thuban in the constellation Draco held the position. Before that, other stars marked north. And yet, ancient monuments are aligned with these shifting stars. Egyptian pyramids align with Thuban. Stone circles in Europe mark stellar points that only made sense thousands of years ago. This suggests the builders weren't just aligning to the present sky. They knew the sky moved, slowly, but inevitably. The mystery of how they knew, so how did ancient people, without telescopes or satellites, understand cosmic cycles lasting tens of thousands of years? The mainstream answer: long observation, careful records, and oral tradition. Over generations, changes could be noticed and passed down. That's possible, but it would take immense dedication and stability. How many civilizations repeatedly disrupted by famine, war, and disaster could sustain such records for millennia? The alternative answer is stranger. They didn't discover it, they inherited it. From a forgotten civilization, or perhaps even from beings beyond Earth. Cycles as warnings. If the ancients knew of cosmic cycles, perhaps they weren't studying them for curiosity. Perhaps they were warnings. Precession could mark when certain stars rise, or when comets return. Solar cycles could warn of times of chaos. Mythic ages could encode real patterns of destruction and renewal. Maybe the ancients weren't just sky gazers. They were watchmen, guardians of deep time, trying to pass forward knowledge of dangers too vast for one lifetime to comprehend. Are we the ones who forgot? Today, most people don't even look up at the stars. We've lost touch with the sky. We trust our technology, our calendars, our machines. But the ancients may have seen what we ignore: that human history is fragile, caught in cosmic rhythms we can't control. If they truly knew of cycles beyond their time, then perhaps they weren't primitive at all. Perhaps we are, the civilization that forgot to look up. And this brings us to the most unsettling possibility of all. If the ancients tracked deep time and warned of cosmic cycles, maybe it wasn't because they were alone in the universe. Maybe it was because they weren't. Many myths don't just speak of cycles. They speak of teachers, beings from the stars who shared their knowledge. Were these simply metaphors or memories of real contact? So far, we've looked at how ancient people tracked the stars, built monuments aligned with them, encoded cosmic disasters into myths, and somehow grasped cycles of time spanning tens of thousands of years. But that leaves us with a haunting question. How did humans without telescopes, satellites, or modern science truly discover all this on their own? Or is it possible that someone or something helped them? For centuries, myths across the world have told of gods, teachers, and visitors who descended from the heavens. Modern researchers call this the ancient astronaut theory. Mainstream scholars dismiss it as fantasy, but when we look closely, the similarities between cultures become difficult to ignore. Were the ancients simply projecting their hopes onto the sky, or were they remembering real encounters with beings who came from beyond the star? The Sumerian Anunnaki in Mesopotamia, one of the earliest civilizations, the Sumerians wrote of beings called the Anunnaki. These weren't distant abstract gods. They were described as powerful beings who descended from the heavens, shaped humanity, and gave kings their authority. According to the myths, the Anunnaki taught humans agriculture, writing, and science. They were said to live among men, ruling cities and guiding civilization. But eventually they withdrew, returning to the sky. To mainstream historians, these are myths, symbolic stories about power and divine order. But some alternative researchers argue the details sound like memories of contact with advanced beings. If the Anunnaki were real, perhaps they weren't gods at all, but visitors from another world. The Dogon and the Nommo from Sirius, the Dogon people of Mali, tell of the Nommo, amphibious beings who came from the star Sirius. The Nommo, according to Dogon tradition, descended from the sky in a vessel, accompanied by fire and thunder. They taught the Dogon astronomy, agriculture, and spiritual practices. What's eerie is the detail. The Dogon said Sirius had a companion star, invisible to the eye, but with a dense weight and a 50-year-old. Modern astronomy confirmed this in the 20th century. Sirius B is a white dwarf star exactly as described. Skeptics claim the Dogon must have learned this knowledge from modern contact, but anthropologists recorded the Sirius tradition before such contact was likely. If that's true, how did they know? And why did their myths tie their origin to visitors from the stars? The feathered serpent, Kukulkan and Quetzalcoatl. Across Mesoamerica, cultures spoke of a mysterious teacher, the feathered serpent. The Maya called him Kukulkan. The Aztecs called him Quetzalcoatl. He was described as a god who came from the sky, taught humanity agriculture, writing, and astronomy, and then departed, promising to return. What's fascinating is how human he often seems. Some depictions show him as a bearded man, unlike the native population. Some stories say he traveled by sea or sky, arriving with companions. His promise to return shaped Aztec history. When the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, some believed Quetzalcoatl had returned. Was he a myth, a symbol of knowledge, or was he a memory of a real figure, perhaps even a visitor from beyond? The Egyptian gods from Orion and Sirius. Egyptian mythology is saturated with stars. Osiris was linked to Orion, Isis to Sirius. Together they represented death, rebirth, and cosmic order. The pyramids themselves are aligned with Orion's belt and Sirius, suggesting the gods weren't just symbolic, they were literally mapped into the sky. Texts describe the pharaoh's soul ascending to Orion to join Osiris in the afterlife. But what if these weren't metaphors? What if they reflected a belief, or even an experience, that the gods came from Orion and Sirius, taught humanity, and then returned? Modern researchers who explore this angle argue that the Egyptians weren't worshipping stars. They were honoring their origin. The sky people have native traditions across the Americas. Indigenous traditions speak of sky people. The Hopi tell of the Kachina, spirit beings who came from the heavens to guide humanity. Many Native American myths describe visitors who descended from the stars, taught survival skills, and then left. To the Zuni, ancestors came from the middle of the fourth world, through a portal in the sky. To the Cree, the stars were windows into the sky world, home of powerful beings. These weren't abstract gods. They were described in physical terms, beings with form, presence, and technology mistaken for magic. India's Vimanas, flying palaces of the gods. In ancient Indian texts, there are descriptions of Vimanas, flying palaces or chariots used by gods and heroes. The Mahabharata and Ramayana describe aerial battles, weapons of immense power, and machines that could travel between worlds. To mainstream scholars, these are poetic metaphors. But some passages describe details eerily similar to aircraft or spacecraft. Vimanas are said to have been powered by Mercury engines, reflecting real experimentation with Mercury as a propellant in modern times. Are these coincidences, or are they echoes of encounters with technology mistaken for divine power? Cargo cults, as a clue, skeptics argue that myths of gods descending from the sky are simply human imagination. But we have a modern example of how such stories can arise. During World War II, isolated island tribes encountered soldiers with planes, technology, and supplies. To the tribes, these soldiers seemed like gods. They built shrines to airplanes, performed rituals to summon cargo drops, and passed down stories of sky beings who brought gifts. If this could happen in the 20th century, why couldn't it have happened thousands of years ago? If an advanced civilization, human or otherwise, visited ancient peoples, the memory could easily evolve into myths of gods from the stars. Were they teachers or watchers? If the ancients did encounter beings from the stars, what was their role? Were they teachers, guiding humanity into civilization? Were they gods demanding worship? Or were they watchers monitoring us as an experiment, then leaving when their task was complete? The myths suggest a mixture. Some gods were benevolent, bringing knowledge and light. Others were destructive, punishing humanity with floods or fire. Could this reflect different factions or simply human attempts to understand incomprehensible visitors? The debate mainstream historians argue there's no evidence of extraterrestrial contact. They say myths are symbolic, alignments are coincidence, and artifacts are misunderstood. To them, the ancients were brilliant but human. But alternative researchers counter, if we strip away assumptions, the evidence is compelling. Universal myths of sky gods, global alignments to Orion and Sirius, inexplicable artifacts like the Dogon's Sirius knowledge. Together they suggest something more. Maybe the ancients weren't alone. Maybe their knowledge of the stars wasn't entirely their own. The alien angle and human identity. If it's true, if beings from the stars really did guide humanity, then what does that mean for us? Are we simply products of chance? Or are we part of a larger cosmic story? Did visitors shape our DNA, our myths, our civilizations? And if they left, will they return? The possibility may be unsettling, but it also reframes our place in the universe. The ancients didn't look up at the stars as strangers. They looked up as if gazing at home. Perhaps they remembered something we've forgotten, and that brings us to the final question. If the ancients knew so much, whether through observation, inheritance, or help from the stars, what have we lost? What knowledge did they hold that we no longer understand? And what warnings did they try to leave for us, buried in myth, monument, and mystery? We've followed the ancients through their monuments, myths, and mystery. We've seen how they watched the sky with an obsession that bordered on desperation, how they aligned their greatest structures with stars and cycles, how they encoded warnings into stories of gods and serpents, how they may even have been guided by teachers from the heaven. But after all of this, one question remains. What have we forgotten? Because if the ancients really knew so much about the stars, their rhythms, their dangers, their meaning, then our modern civilization may be built not on the cutting edge of knowledge, but on fragments of what was once common understanding. The fragility of human memory. Human history is short. Our oldest written records go back about 5,000 years. Our oldest civilizations may be 10,000. But the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. Even if advanced human cultures rose and fell before us, their traces would be almost impossible to find after millions of years. Cities crumble, metal corrodes, coastlines drown beneath rising seas, and yet myths survive. Stone survives. Alignments carved into mountains survive. Maybe the ancients understood that human memory is fragile, and that if they wanted to pass forward knowledge, they couldn't trust words or books. They had to trust the language of story, stone and star. So what have we forgotten? Perhaps the very reason they built their monuments. Perhaps the very warnings they tried to preserve. The danger of cosmic amnesia modern people rarely look up. Most live under light-polluted skies, where the Milky Way is invisible. We trust satellites to tell us when to plant, computers to tell us time, GPS to tell us direction. We've outsourced the sky, but the ancients lived with it. Every night, every season, they built their lives around it. And if they were trying to tell us something about floods, comets, cycles, or visitors, we may be too distracted to notice. This is cosmic amnesia, the forgetting of our relationship with the stars. We dismiss myths as superstition, monuments as mere religious devotion, anomalies as coincidence. But what if those were the only ways ancient people could warn us? If so, we're ignoring a message carved into the very foundations of our world. Warnings hidden in plain sight. Consider how often the myths speak of cycles. Floods that come again and again. Suns that die and are reborn. Ages that end in fire or ice. These may not be fantasies, they may be encoded science. Ways of telling us that cosmic events repeat, that catastrophes aren't rare, but inevitable. We've already seen fragments of this truth. The Younger Dryas cataclysm, the volcanic eruptions that ended civilizations, the comets that skim our skies, the solar storms that threaten our technology. Maybe the ancients weren't primitive skygazers at all. Maybe they were guardians of memory, trying to tell us, watch the heavens, because everything that has happened will happen again. But beyond warnings, what other knowledge might we have lost? Navigation. Polynesians could cross thousands of miles of ocean using nothing but the stars. Today, most sailors couldn't find Polaris in the sky. Cycles. Egyptians and Hindus tracked cosmic rhythms lost in tens of thousands of years. Modern culture barely plans beyond a century. Astronomy and story. The constellations weren't just pictures, they were coded lessons about eclipses, comets, and solstices. How many of those codes have we forgotten? Technology. The Antikythera mechanism hints at a science of machines tied to the heavens. Were there others? Did we lose entire sciences when libraries burned and civilizations fell? If so, then our modern astronomy may be a rediscovery, not a discovery. And what we think of as progress may just be us piecing together fragments of an older, deeper knowledge. And then there's the most provocative possibility that we've forgotten our own origins. If beings from the stars really did teach humanity, whether Sumerian Anunnaki, Mayan feathered serpents, or Dogon Nomo, then maybe our entire story is incomplete. We may not be the first intelligent civilization on Earth. We may not even be entirely alone in our own history. And if the ancients were right, maybe those visitors promised to return. If that's true, then forgetting isn't just ignorance. It's dangerous. Because one day, when the sky gods come back, we may not even recognize them. Why the ancients still matter? Some might say, why care? We have satellites, telescopes, science. We can map the stars better than anyone in history. But the ancients remind us of something science often forgets: humility. They knew the sky could kill. They knew cycles were bigger than empires. They knew humanity was fragile, and they tried, in every way they could, to tell us. We may have lost the context, but the message lingers. In Orion's belt, mirrored in pyramids, in the Pleiades, remembered in myths from every continent, in stone circles, sun daggers, flood stories, and warnings of fire from above, it's all still there, if we choose to see it. So what did the ancients know about the stars that we don't? Maybe they knew the stars were our origin. Maybe they knew the heavens bring both life and death. Maybe they knew cycles of destruction will come again. Or maybe, and this is the hardest truth to face, maybe they knew we would forget. And maybe that's the real warning, not just to watch the skies, but to remember, to look up every night, and remember that our story is written above us, in lights older than humanity itself. One day, our own civilization will vanish. Our cities will crumble, our machines will rust, but the stars will still shine. If someone thousands of years from now looks up and wonders about us, will they find the warnings we left behind? Or will they ask the same question we ask of the ancients? What did they know, and why did they try so hard to tell us?